Carol Hornbuckle. Today is June 25th, 2009, and I'm interviewing Mary Patience Peterson for the project on the 1930s. Mary, would you just tell us a little bit about your parents, where they lived, where you were born, and stories about that event?
Well, my parents lived at rural Imogene, Iowa, which happens to be just a couple of miles from where I currently live now, but I have a Shenandoah address. My son Dan, who lives there, still has an Imogene address. My parents, Dan and Stella Bussard Patience. My mother was a native of Imogene, and my grandmother lived there. And I visited her many times in the summer for Bible school. Packed a suitcase to go about 3 miles and stay overnight. It was a real treat.
And you were born at home?
I was born at home. A doctor came there, and with a friend of theirs, her name was Mary. I always thought that's probably how I got my name, that acted as a nurse for my mother. Back then it was rather difficult, birth and that sort of thing.
And you are an only child?
I am. And my parents had been married a number of years before I was born, so I think that was probably the reason I was an only child.
And you were born in October, so there was no weather worries?
No, in fact, I remember hearing my dad say that it was the best corn crop he ever had at that point.
And you were a bonus.
Maybe, I don't know. He thought so, I think.
Good. What did your parents do? They were farmers
They were
then.
farmers. Mother raised chickens and sold eggs, and she pocketed the egg money, I think. And Daddy milked a herd of Holstein cows and sold cream. And
So the milk you used yourselves on the farm?
Oh, yes.
How did their situation change during the 30s?
Well, it was a blessing to be on the farm because we had our own produce, raised big gardens, had our eggs and our meat. We never knew what it was to be hungry. I had an aunt and uncle, however, that lived here in Shenandoah with a big family that had a real struggle during those years. And when we'd butcher a hog or even a steer, there'd always be food and stuff to share with my aunt and uncle in town.
And what were their names?
Van Sant, Effie and Worth Van Sant. That was my dad's sister and her husband. They eventually left during those Depression years. They left to go to California, and it was coming wartime, and they worked in the bomber plants out there, and to have jobs,
Yes, yes.
And they never did come back. I still have cousins that live out in California.
There were a lot of people who had to move, weren't there, at that time to find work
I'm sure
and
there
hope
must
for
have
it.
been. Sure there must have been. Of course, I was a child of 5 when the 30s started, and I wasn't probably nearly aware of the Depression days. But my cousins that went to school with me, we went to Rice School, country school, and I remember, the lack of clothing, shoes, warm coats, and the things that they needed in the winter.
What other memories do you have of school? How long was your school year? You told us you attended Rice Country School. What kind of clothing did you wear?
Well, we didn't wear jeans and slacks. If we pulled on a pair of long pants, it was always under a skirt, because you just didn't do that.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate in that my dad always saw to it I got to school one way or another, a horse and buggy or horseback. I didn't have to walk if the weather was really bad. I was really lucky.
How far was your school from your home?
3/4 of a mile.
Do you remember any of your teachers' names?
I only had one, and her name was Mary Dempsey. She was from Imogene. She stayed with the Bradleys that just lived half a mile up the road east of the schoolhouse, and that's where she stayed.
Were either of your parents were either of your parents on the school board or take part in any of the...
No,
Okay.
we had a director. Mr. Bradley was the director. I don't know there was a school board. The supervisor, no, maybe that wasn't her title, from Fremont County. Her name was Mrs. Dalen, and she would drop in and see us.
Oh, county superintendent.
County superintendent.
Mhm.
She would drop in and see us once in a while, which would throw a fear into Miss Dempsey's, Miss
Right.
Dempsey's heart, but never hurt anything. It was never painful.
How was your school heated?
With a tall wood and coal burning stove. Usually the teacher would get there early enough to start the fire, so it would be halfway warm when we got there. Mhm.
Did your school year start in September to May?
Yes, I think it did.
And you were primary through 8th grade?
No kindergarten at that
No
time.
kindergarten.
So I was almost 6 actually when I started in the 1st grade, because my birthday was in October.
Mhm. Were there any other children in your grade?
Yes, there was 2 others that graduated with me, Eldon Martin and Jack Bradley.
And did you take a test at the end of your 8th grade year in the
yes.
county?
Oh, yes.
See?
And that was a big deal. It really was, and the teacher really impressed on us how important that was to pass those tests.
Right, because it went back on her too, her
Oh, of course.
performance.
Oh, of
Yes. How many students were in your country school? Do you remember? Average.
Well, the most probably we had was 7 or 8. It was a very small school. We got down to, I think, as small as 5 at one
Wow.
time, people moving in and out of the community. But basically, it was made up of my own relatives. I had 4 cousins in the school at the same time that I was.
What are your favorite memories? Did you have programs, socials, of country school?
Country school. Oh, yes, we put on programs. One of my most embarrassing moments was when my cousin and I were doing a gypsy dance, and my skirt came down,
Oh,
and that was humiliating.
yes.
So it's not a favorite memory, but it's certainly stuck in my mind.
Right. And did whole families then have socials there at
Oh,
school?
yes. We had picnics in the summer, and a big picnic in the last day of school. We had, I can't think what you'd call that, where you'd take a cake.
Box social or?
Yeah, box suppers. And the other schools north of us did too, and I remember going to that one time. And I got a prize while I was there.
Oh, and what was the prize?
Well, you wouldn't believe what it was. I don't know who suggested this, but I was the prettiest little girl there.
Whoa.
And I really wasn't very pretty. I had straight black hair and bangs.
So you walked to school on good days?
Oh, yes. And there was a couple of other people that lived down our road that I walked with.
How did your father farm? Did he have work horses, mules?
Workhorses.
A team? team.
Oh, yes.
One
a couple
team,
of teams.
couple of
couple
teams.
of teams. Mm-hmm.
What do you remember? You've talked a little bit about clothing, but what you wore only dresses. But how often did your mother sew for you?
Oh, yes. My mother was a very good seamstress. I remember one winter I had 2 dresses, but we wore aprons over them, pinafore type aprons over them. I wore one dress this week and the next one next week. We were very careful. We didn't build up a lot of laundry.
Right. Did she have a sewing machine, or
Yes, a treadle sewing machine. Mm-hmm.
Did she teach you how to sew?
Yes, she didn't have a lot of patience with me learning to sew. I really learned to sew after I was married. I preferred to be in the kitchen baking, actually.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And she didn't like to cook very well. She liked to clean, and so that's
What kind of stove did you have to use?
a range, a wood and coal burning range. Had a big water reservoir on the one end, so we always had hot water, but not out of a tank like we have it now.
Mm-hmm. Did you have running water in your house?
Yes, my dad fashioned up a big tank upstairs in the attic of the kitchen, so we had cold running water.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. And you learned how to regulate temperature with, you knew how much coal you'd need or wood, or how did you regulate for baking? Just by guess and by golly?
Yes, my grandmother used to say, just put your hand in the oven, and if it feels right
Ooh.
to you, why it's time to put the cake in. Well, I never got that good at it, really. I must have just had good luck.
So you raised most of your own food then, practically
Much so.
all.
Mother did a lot of canning. There was no freezing at that point.
You had your own milk, so you churned butter.
Yes, yes.
Did you drink buttermilk?
I did. I loved home churned buttermilk. It's not like what you buy in a carton now.
Right, right.
But I loved that soury taste. It was good.
Do you remember any favorite foods or things growing up? Did you have berries or anything, fruit trees?
Cherry trees. It turned out not to be my favorite. The reason being that I was given a pie in my lap as a little girl as we rode back to the timber for a picnic. The cherry pie was in my lap. And, of course, you can guess what happened. It spilled over into my dress. And what did Mama do but pin my dress up in front of me? I was so embarrassed.
Oh.
I don't know how old I was at that point, but it was funny. But I never really did like cherries very well anyway. It was not my favorite fruit, but that was about the only thing. I'd go to Grandma's and pick mulberries to go with the cherries. That was really good. And Grandma just lived up the hill from us, about just a good walk up the hill from us.
So you probably put in a lot of gardening time, too, growing up.
Yes, I did. I helped.
What did you
I
grow
helped.
in the garden?
Oh, all the early spring stuff. The onions, the lettuce, the radishes, all that.
Peas?
Carrots, peas, oh yes. After my family got old enough to be of lots of help, my dad raised peas for us. He always planted 2 pounds of peas, which is a lot of peas.
Yes.
And we'd pick and then go home and did we have TV then? I guess we did. We did have television then at that time. This was after we moved from south of town up north of town in the 60s. This was in the 60s. And we'd sit around shelling peas.
Yes. Can you remember any specific games that you played indoors or outdoors? at school?
Well, we played the running games, Black Man
Black man. What's black man?
and Black Man Out or something like that.
Oh.
I mean, you run around and chase the guy that was it, and then you try to get his place, you know. Oh, it was just a running game.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What did
We
you
had
do
big
when?
swings,
Mm-hmm.
and but we didn't have equipment like they have nowadays, no teeter-totter or anything. But we did have big, long swings because we had big, tall trees. And
So you had wooden and rope swings.
sure.
What did you do when you had to stay inside?
Miss Dempsey played the piano by ear, and she could always play a tune for us. We'd sing. She'd read.
Mm-hmm.
She had a series of books that she read that we just loved, called the Jerry Todd series.
The Jerry Todd series.
Have you ever heard of that, Carol?
No.
I come across a couple of books in an antique store one time and bought them just for old time's sake. But we just doted on those books. And she'd read a chapter or two,
Mhm.
just anything to keep us
Mhm.
happy.
Were they like adventure stories
Oh,
of
yeah.
about a young boy?
Jerry Todd.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do you remember about anything called kitten ball?
Yes, but we didn't play kitten ball or baseball or softball very seldom. There wasn't. It was just mostly. I think girls were in the majority. We didn't have a lot of boys to be interested in baseball and those kind of things. I remember one time, it was really a real experience. We girls always thought it was fun to go swinging around the flagpole. It was a metal one. And, you know, you hang on and you just swing around it. That flagpole came down one time, and no one was hurt. Nobody was in the way, thank goodness.
Wow.
But it's a memory that I have.
And you always raised the flag
Oh,
every morning.
absolutely.
Did you have any other kind of opening exercise that you did every day at country school?
I really can't remember. We didn't do a Pledge of Allegiance or that kind of thing. No, I can't remember. And we didn't say prayers
Mm-hmm.
either. I don't know that it was.
Probably not looked down upon.
I don't think it was,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the weather in the 1930s? The heat, the drought, the snow, the cold. What, do you have any particular memories?
No.
Really?
Not really. I just know that we were snowed in many times, but we were always warm and comfortable. Daddy always had enough coal and wood on hand to keep us warm. We always had food. There was no problem with food. And, of course, school was closed. I remember one time school was closed as long as 6 weeks, but I'm not sure whether that was in the 30s or just must have been. It would have had to been, because I was out of school there in 39, so it would have had to been. Mm-hmm.
What, and was that due to weather or illness or
snowbanks? You couldn't get through them. And of course, the community of farmers would dig out the snow. Eventually, my father would walk across the fields to Highway 59. We were just a mile off of 59, and catch a ride in with somebody into town to get the things that we just thought we had to have. And that wasn't very often.
Right. I had a question I was thinking of, and maybe it'll come back to me. What about the drought?
Oh, I remember the drought in 34. Oh, yes. I'll never forget. We also, as well as having a drought, had grasshoppers and all the things that go with it. And I remember in my great-grandmother and my great-uncles at the time lived in Wichita, Kansas. And Daddy come in one day and he said, well, I think the crops are gone. Let's go for a trip. Can you imagine? And so we packed our bag and got in the old Buick, and we drove to Wichita, which was the only time I ever saw my great-grandmother. This would be on my mother's side.
Was it real hot during that trip?
Oh, yes. I guess it was. And before we got to Wichita, we had an amazing thing happen. We lost a tire or wheel off of our car, a back wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how far we went before Daddy realized there had to be something wrong. And then from then on, I don't remember anything about it, but it was something that was quite traumatic at the time for him.
Were conditions better or worse in Wichita? Do you remember at all? Was the family you visited there, were they also farmers?
No. Grandma was elderly, of course, and
Mm-hmm.
the two sons lived with her. I don't believe either one of them at that point were employed anywhere. The only memory I have of being there, besides having pictures taken with her, was the watermelons, the Kansas watermelons that they'd bring in, the great big watermelons. Because I remember it because I overate. Didn't have much sleep that night.
What about refrigeration in your home? How did you keep things cold?
An ice box.
Ice box. And where did you get the ice? Did you harvest your own ice
No.
or delivered?
No. Daddy came to Shenandoah and got it from the old ice plant here in Shenandoah. And he would, I don't know how he did it. He would drag 100 pounds of ice up the walk
Wow.
and get it into the ice box.
Mhm.
And he was not a big, burly, strong man. He was a tall, slender man, but he was strong, I guess. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
When you were talking about the extreme cold and the snow, what effect did that have on the cows that you had? How did that affect milking?
Well, we had good barns, and I suppose he kept them very close. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't remember that. He milked as many as 8 or 9 cows,
Mhm. Mhm.
and he also had room in the barn for 2 teams of horses. So it was fairly warm in there with all those bodies.
Right, and you probably had the hay in the
Oh,
loft,
that's
so they
right.
had the food there.
That was a good jumping off place. Up in
Oh.
the loft. Did you have that, Carol?
Yes, loved it.
Loved it too. Mother thought I was a real tomboy.
Do you have any other memories of your family making changes because of the bad economy, or like closing off parts of your house? Did you ever close off parts of your house for the heating or?
Oh, yes, we did that. We closed off the front bedroom. We slept in the living room near the fire. Yeah.
What about in the summer during the heat? How did you deal with the heat?
I remember laying on my bed after I had a little room of my own with wet towels, and I'd lay right up next to the window practically. But being an only child is different than a big family. I never did go outside to sleep. I know my
Mhm.
cousins would go outdoors to
Mhm.
sleep, but I never did that.
Where did your parents sleep? It's still in their
In
bedroom?
their bedroom.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Do you remember anything about how did you deal with the dust in your house? Do you remember anything about that?
Well, Mother was a good housekeeper. Daddy built a new home for my mother at the time they were married, and it was a nice, tight little bungalow.
Mhm.
And she, my teacher referred to my mother as Old Dutch Cleanser because she was always chasing dirt. She was very conscious of it. And she, like I said, she liked to clean. I liked to cook and bake. We got along fine.
Do you ever remember bartering how did you buy the things in town that you needed? Did you barter for them, or you sold eggs, you said, or cream?
We sold the eggs. We also sold cream. Her mother referred to it as trading cream for butter. So I guess you'd call that bartering with the cream station that was here in town.
Mm-hmm.
So we used butter. She didn't very often actually churn her own butter.
Oh.
My grandmother did, but she did not. And, you know, if we'd been a big family, it'd been different. But she would get a pound of butter for some cream that was taken in. And
So for the things you needed that you bought in the store in town, did you pay money or?
Daddy did all the grocery shopping. Mother very seldom went to town. And she was not much of a shopper.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't care for shopping.
Mm-hmm.
And Daddy bought the groceries, and he'd sell a carton of eggs, and he'd go to the store and buy what we had to have.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And also paid for a piano lesson for me, which was 50 cents for an hour.
Wow. And did you go to town for those?
Yes.
Who was your
Yes.
piano teacher?
Mildred Raitt.
Mildred Raitt. R-A-I-D-T.
Mm-hmm. You remember the Raitt Manufacturing
Yes.
Company? Yeah, it was. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
How many years did you take piano lessons?
I think I was in the third grade of music when I kind of tapered off. And I was
Did you have a piano in your home?
Oh, yes. Yes, we did, which was a sore subject because at the time, I think a salesman must have come through and sold them the piano. And Mother regretted it from the day they bought it because she thought they never was going to get it paid for. But
Good salesman
But
then.
they did. But they did.
Do you remember any other salesman that would come through?
Oh, sure, the Watkins man.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He was the only, I loved it when the Watkins man come. That was always fun.
Do you remember anything about hobos or gypsies who would stop by?
I only can remember one time. We didn't live far from a railroad track that was west of our house. And Mother would always feed somebody that came to the door. She was always very concerned about it. If she left the house to even go back to the timber with Daddy, she always locked the house.
Mm.
She was afraid for hobos.
Mm-hmm.
But I can only remember one time when that happened, when I was there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But they would mark a house, you know, and they'd say,
Right.
yeah, we got a meal here, so come back again.
What about Christmases? What do you remember about
Mm.
Christmases?
Well, it was always something to really look forward to. My dad loved Christmas, and we always hung a stocking up, and I always got a doll or something that I wanted, you know.
Were all your gifts in the stocking? Did you have?
No.
So what was usually in your stocking?
An orange, some candy, nuts,
Mm-hmm.
mixed nuts. They always bought mixed nuts at Christmas. Can't think of anything.
And
else.
dolls.
Or one time I think there was a coloring book rolled up real tight down in my sock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then I had a doll. I had a Betsy Wetsy doll. Did you have one,
Yes,
Carol?
I did.
And I love dolls.
Did you make clothes for them, or did you do
My
anything
grandmother made clothes for my doll. I never did much sewing for the dolls.
So were they that hard rubber sort of, most of them?
Mm-hmm. And then I had a bigger girl doll that was hard legs and hard arms, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mabel. I called her Mabel.
Were there special foods? What's your heritage? Ethnic heritage? Did you have special foods or any kind of customs around Christmas?
Not so much. Not nearly as much as did after we were married, when I married into a Swedish family. That
Right.
was a different story. But my mother was Pennsylvania Dutch. My dad was English. His family came from Canada down here. And So I don't really remember. It was always just roast chicken and dressing and apple salad that my aunt made. She always made the apple salad. You know, just certain things about the meals.
Right.
Never turkey. We never had turkey at Thanksgiving. It was too expensive. And we raised our own chickens, so
Right.
Mother always
Right.
put back a couple of nice roasting pullets that she'd dress and for our meal.
Do you remember helping with chickens? Did you put
Oh,
up
sure.
a lot of chickens?
No.
At one time, no. You just did it as you needed them.
Right.
What about butchering? Did you do the butchering right on the farm?
Yes, yes. Daddy would butcher a hog. That was one of my fears when I was little, because of course it would be cold weather when you butcher. And so eventually the halves of hog would get into the front, not the front of the house, but the back of the house, and hang in the, and I'd see those things, and it bothered me. But I was pretty little at that time.
Did you have like a root cellar or a place
Cave.
underground that you
No.
stored things?
Just a basement.
Okay. What about birthdays? Was there any special celebration with
We
birthdays?
didn't let them go unnoticed. I mean, we always had a birthday cake on a pedestal cake plate.
What kind of cake was it usually?
Oh, it had to be angel food.
You had lots of eggs, so you had the egg whites,
Certainly,
right?
certainly. Yeah.
Is there any one thing from the 30's that profoundly affected you that you've not forgotten or has...
I just feel like I was very much protected from the economy. I don't think many parents really shared a lot of that, what they were going through. I do remember my mother saying one time that she did not have money enough in the house for a stamp.
And stamps were not very expensive
No.
then.
So there
Couple
was no
pennies.
change, you know, no money. But I never heard, they protected me. They kept that away from me, which is maybe too bad. I mean, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I think we tend to protect our children from,
Right.
even now,
Right.
from those kinds of
Right.
things.
But
Do you remember ever going to Shenandoah for swimming pool or kind of social events
not
or
until-
recreation events?
Not until I was in high school.
Okay.
I didn't
How did
learn to swim, and I didn't learn very well then either. But I did get to town to take some swimming lessons. It was kind of funny. My dad sold the milk, or the cream, to the creamery here in town, and the young man would come out and get the cream, and I would hitch a ride into town with him. Can you imagine that happening nowadays?
And then,
But anyway, and then Daddy'd get in to get me.
and so that was at the swimming pool at Sportsman's Park.
Right, right.
Huge swimming pool.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Nicest one in the area.
Do you remember attending any fairs or any other things at Sportsman's Park or movies or?
My uncle was still in Imogene at the time. He did home movies, so we'd go up to Imogene and sit out on the lawn of somebody's home, I don't remember whose home, and watch movies that he would set up and do. You know.
Show them on the side of the house or barn?
No, he had a screen.
Oh, he had a screen.
He had a screen.
And he had a projector then. They were on film? They must have-
Evidently, I don't know the details
Wow.
about that, but we saw home movies. We also went to Coyne to see movies down
Wow,
there.
that was a
Did
long
you ever
trip.
do that?
Well, I can remember my mother telling me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
That was quite a trip.
Yes, it was.
From Imogene to Coyne. How
But-
long would that have taken to
Well,
drive?
Well, I don't really know, but I had an aunt and uncle that lived near Coyne, so we made the trip to Coyne quite often to see them.
How were the roads? What were they?
Dirty and muddy when it rained. They were muddy when it rained.
Do you remember anything about Porter's Lake or anything?
Not until high school
High school.
days. And then we did go roller skating and those kind of things. That had picnics out there.
Rowboats and did they have boats?
Yes, and the big swing that would swing out over the lake. Yeah, Porter's Lake was quite a place to go.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Do you remember anything about the CCC camps that were in Shenandoah?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I certainly do. I had a boyfriend,
Aha!
but then, of course, this was beyond the 30s. This was back in the 40s, in the 40s. And often wonder what become of him. That it was a MP camp, military police camp, that I remember. Now, the CCC, you're talking that's different. I'm thinking of the military. I just remember that they worked on the park down at Wabansie, and yes, just vaguely, but I don't remember the camp itself. I think when the military come in, that's where they were, was at that.
Right,
I
they
think
used
were,
that same camp.
facility, yeah.
So where was this young man from that you befriended? Do you remember?
I don't even remember.
Okay, all right.
I remember his name, but I don't, he was from the South, but I don't remember where.
Okay. Well, anything else that you would like to share with us or tell us?
Well, I think this is a very interesting project. I'd be interested in seeing how it plays out and what they plan to do. How many are you actually interviewing, or do you have any idea?
I don't think they've made a final count of how many. I think they're still looking for volunteers to share. So we do thank you very much for sharing your
Most
memories.
certainly.
And I've been talking with Mary Patience Peterson and about her experiences in the 30s.